Thank you. I'm not sure if we go back to the roots of DevOps, to be honest. I want to go out to the edges and the new things. So that's probably more fitting for me. The intro said principles and patterns. I haven't gotten to principles yet, so I'm just going to talk about patterns. Why the horses? Well, the mist is there. We don't know yet what AI is going to give us. That's one way of looking at it. The other way, it could be the four horses of the apocalypse. So that could be as well. Also horses, because unicorns don't exist, and we're trying to make like everything work right now. All right, let's kick it off. Development, Copilot. There was an earlier presentation on this. That's what most people kind of think about, like, oh, tab completion very easily. But we'll move quite quick. The chat came, we're going to do copy and paste. That was the next thing. Oh, great, right? Oh, suggestions. Why are we copy and pasting? Why can't we just say instant apply and done, right? Okay, we got more confident on doing this. Why only have the one completion? Why not do multiple lines completions at the same time? And I'm trying to build up like the whole thing. Now it's predicting where my next cursor should be. Like I'm editing here, just go there, start your work here. It started understanding our code bases. It was a little bit of a funny thing. Like everybody thought it was talking about fine tuning. We kind of went off that track and said, let's kind of look at our local code bases. And it was funny because the big companies asking for fine tuning were the first ones to say, not on our code. So this was kind of the solution, doing it locally, keeping it locally. But, you know, we've went to one file or a tab completion to multiple files now being suggested. So you see it's just getting more and more, taking more things like the terminal feedback. It's not just your code completion. It looks at our browser. Also cool, right? You know, we understand basically our loop, like, oh, code, browser, open, you know, taking everything into account. Generating tests for test coverage. Yes, although it's a little bit tricky, like the same thing, writing the test for itself, who watches the watchers. But that aside, it is definitely helping us with that as well. And then came reasoning models. So instead of just doing the completion and kind of the code, it started more thinking. Obviously, it's not thinking, but kind of breaking down our problems and reasoning what we should do and then kind of doing the suggestions. And one of the tools, I don't know if you come across that, Devin made a big splash saying, well, we can just do that continuous loop. It actually looks at the terminal, opens the browser, kind of does that stuff, right? So we've come a long way from that simple tab completion that most people know Copilot, where we're now at with the tooling. And then why have one Devin, right? You can have multiple Devins work at the same time on your code base, maybe on this directory, maybe on this part, good as well. My main point is, it's not anymore about the LLM. It is expanded from LLM, adding the RAG to the local indexing to kind of the functions that it's calling. And it just went on and on. That technology is very interesting, but we're not going to talk about it today. But it just gives you a sense that it is, like when people discuss like, oh, model A is better than B, that's great. But there's a lot of other factors that go into making this work. And there is a belief or a hope, much like we had with autonomous vehicles, that one day it will drive for us, completely autonomous. Now, I don't know, in some cases it succeeds quite well. In other cases, we're still not there yet, but look at the money that we've invested in there. But I do think the generative AI is actually different from the traditional AI this is built on. Like generative AI is inherently prone to errors. So we should treat it differently. We'll come back to that later. And obviously, new technology bring new technology roles, right? We're not all the experts because nobody was the expert before in that new technology, which is really great. And obviously, that's why I'm talking to you, because now I can say I'm also an expert in this. It's been mentioned that, of course, DevSecOps, near and dear to my heart, but I looked for a way to learn more. And for me, it was like engineering with AI. So that's partly why I started thinking about that space, and the technology is maturing, so I thought it was a good time for this. All right, so we've seen this morning It's more of the same, right? Oh, cloud native. But how do we do like a VLAN? Oh no, now it's called like a VPC, right? And it's the same thing with AI native. We don't know exactly how it's going to do, but it's going to be more than slapping AI on the surface. And as we mentioned a few times, we need to kind of put it more at the center and rethink what we do. And we talked about the LLM effect. The real thing is that humans, are we going to be out of a job, right? And a lot of people worry, including me, for my children, studying in IT, working in IT, what's their future? What are they doing? Challenging. Now, I started looking for some clues on what this could mean for us. And I found this visualization quite interesting, is that imagine all the things you do as a software engineer or whatever role you have in the company. There's certain things when a new technology hits that will kind of be enhanced by it. So great, you can do a better job, maybe faster and so on. There's going to be new pieces or new tasks you can do you've never done before. And some pieces of work are just going to be redundant. So the unbundling of tasks is what we're going for. So a lot of people talk about the code generation. Yes, that's one piece of a job a good software engineer does, right? So that one be replaced, but maybe we'll move into other parts. And so the talk is a little bit on where are we moving next, right? If these things are happening and they are meeting the expectations that it's getting more autonomous and getting better, what is happening to us? I distilled it in the 4 AI native dev patterns, and we're going to dive into each of them. But one is, it's been mentioned before, we're going to express more intent than worry about the implementation. We're going to be less producing code, but more reviewing and becoming a manager of the code. We're going to look at what is being created, and hopefully we'll get some knowledge out of that. And if we have a lot of time saved, maybe we can do discovery of what is actually the thing that we need to build, right? So those kind of 4 patterns we go through. First one is producer to manager. Writing code with AI, yes, you can push more, but the pull requests get longer, right? So the reviewing time of the PR just goes up. And the cognitive load actually rises because now we haven't done the process of thinking about and creating it, but now we have to jump in that moment of reviewing. And we've all done PR reviews of our peers, but kind of that takes quite some time. And the more code is being produced like that, the cognitive load is going to rise there as well. Now, I want to show you a few things of examples where tools are starting to help us. Yes, we have the div view, like what is it, red and green? I can't even see, I'm colorblind. There's a chat view who gives it very verbose. I don't have time to read all that stuff. And then I found like a very simple thing, that cursor there, it kind of like describes actually what is being changed, replaces that piece of code by just an explanation of text. A lot simpler to review this code than all of the previous things. It's just an example of tools maturing and looking for a way for us to deal with these problems that we see of more code. Now, sometimes it's multiple files. I already mentioned this. So they take us to one step at a time and have us review the pieces. Another way of reducing cognitive load, of breaking it down into smaller things that we have to review and give feedback on. Sometimes making a diagram can help reduce cognitive load, because looking at this in code is totally different at us looking at a diagram. Oh yes, immediately you can spot the difference or what happened or what's not connected. And this brings up one of the things that is called moldable development, where your IDE might start adapting to the task at hand. So the review, whatever the previous problem is, your IDE might not just be about your code, but about what the problem is you're trying to review. So this is one way of reducing cognitive load to get there. Now, sometimes tools already take the step is, let's auto-commit, skip the review. Let's do it. Okay, if you're certain enough, but still you kind of are able to do the review. But we want to have a safe space. So what you see is the further they get into the generation and the agents, is as they start creating checkpoints. Do you want to roll back? Are you happy? You want to do this? So that is another way of dealing with the situation where you might have been uncertain, but you do it in a safe environment and you get some part of that review. This is an interesting one. This tool actually says AI cannot touch this file. All right. So this is more about like who gets to do what and then do the review. Like this is still my manual work that I want to do. Brings up a whole new world for IAM on AWS. It was already complex. Imagine now like us having it specifying what the AIs can do to our systems, yes or no. And it was mentioned already before on the panel, if we do blind acceptance of this code being generated, that's risky, right? There's been a study about people accepting more code in the weekends. Why would that be? Right? We don't have time for this, accept, right? But kind of that blind automation is kind of another problem while we're being generated. Postmortem is going to be interested. We don't know which push the button. It was like who's responsible still. So that understanding from the code is also going to move towards understanding things in production as well. And maybe, we have to clean up as users or as humans. Now, the way that I framed it into my head, if I put my DevOps history hat on, we early on had infrastructure as code and getting CI/CD. That was all about getting it to work. Look at the industry that came after that. That was dealing with the failures. Can we understand the failure? Can we detect the failure? Can we design when the failure happens? And lo and behold, if the systems got so good, we weren't good anymore at dealing with the failure. So we had to train ourselves. So all the time saved went into spending the time when the problem occurred, right? So it's not that you can escape this. Now, you might be willing to take that risk as a company, and good for you, right? But that's a choice you make. But it is shifting complexity in a certain way that we're doing right now. So next pattern is we're going to specify more what we want instead of it worrying about the implementation. So what are a few signs that I saw? Yes, the obligatory kind of vibe coding. We just accept what it does. We tell it in a chat prompt, and we just do this continuously. Great for prototyping. When the AI gets really good, maybe, we don't have to worry about it, but still. You see this appearing, like a lot of people started like not typing just prompts, but they started building markdown files with their specifications. And then similar to type them in a prompt, you kind of add the specification of what we want. The directory structure, the type of language, like our kind of, conventions that we use. And it's just start generating this, right? So that kind of trend of reusable prompts and then to kind of you reusing that more into a file. You started the tools adapting to this by having a .ai or whatever the flavor is, where I can specify this so it gets reused. And you can reuse this in your own project. You can reuse that across your team. You can reuse that across your organization. So those are all specifications that would now live somewhere in a wiki or whatever that you can kind of now bring into that process. And I talked about the reasoning process or the reasoning models. We can now take those kind of specifications and break it down to smaller tasks, right? And then it does the implementation for us. Probably then we'll get into the review cycle, which was kind of the first pattern that we have to deal with. So we got into from implementation towards intent-based coding. And all of the tools are heading that way, right? Specify what you want, we'll take care of the business, but when it fails, you still are on your own, right? That's how we are. And so the interface is starting to change, that the products are not in the code space anymore. They just ask it to manage product requirements documents. Ironically enough, product and platform engineering, maybe there's something there that we'll do more products, and we're actually working on that. Now, for those who lived through the times of 4GL a long time ago, everything was promised by defining just the specifications and the AI or whatever automation will do it. specifications are messy, right? Bring everybody in the room, start collaborating, and have a great discussions, and you might disagree. I think we should kind of build more performance. There's no budget for this. So you see kind of like conflicting views. But I'd rather spend my time here at aligning on the specifications than maybe having to boil down on the linter and that stuff, right? So that's moving towards requirements. And it becomes like specification centric. I feed it, it will do it. We're not there yet. I'm not saying we're there yet, but the breakdown, the technology is trying to get us there as well. Now, maybe there's an in-between state that the prompt has partly the specifications. For example, when I build a project, I iterate on it and I add things to the Markdown file step by step. But I've never, until, from my experience, when I give it the whole specification, it does it completely. So there's something about the iterative process that actually also makes it work right now. So you don't feed all the specifications, but you do it in chunks, similar to what we did with the task reviewing. You do smaller bits and pieces and build that in. You do need to have that test harness that we talked about, because otherwise it will change things and you will not notice the things. And this is probably the farthest you can stretch this. If AI is generating all that stuff and we're just giving specifications, why are people still buying SaaS softwares? Because they can take your specification and build your product in-house. So it's a tricky business, but it all comes from first the belief, are we going to get that far? Are we going to get that good? And there's a lot of theories, just the amount of money we're throwing at it, it must be good. Again, it will flaw, and we'll have to deal with this. But that's kind of shows you, like, if you think ahead, what people are almost willing to believe that we're getting to. They might be right. I can't tell you, right? But that's where we're heading. The next one is, so we dealt with the reviewing and the generation. We went a step earlier and said, well, now we can actually tell what it needs to do. But now we have to figure out, actually, what do we need to tell it to do? So instead of focusing on the delivery, just do this thing of the specification, we can do more experiments, because creating things is getting cheaper, so we have multiple options to choose from. The simplest thing you might have seen is an image generation. It's not generating one image, it's generating 5. Pick one. Generate 5 pieces of code. Pick the best one. So that kind of is the pattern here. So a product owner already knows that they're collecting product IDs from a lot of places, right? We could do this on a product, but we could do this also on engineering, all the IDs that the engineers have. We can build some of that research automation capability and use AI to help us come up with different strategies or different IDs. We can use that same visual technique to find gaps, right? We've never thought about structuring things that way, or there's a discovery process and visualization thing there happening as well. There's a story about somebody selling fashion clothing, and they're doing contracting with legal, and they just feed all the information that the party provides, and they have it ask a bunch of questions. And so that verification, when the AI can't answer a question, there must be something wrong in the contract. So that kind of verification and discovery is quite useful. We can do complete designs, right? Because discovering what is a good design, what people actually want, have a few of those kind of generated. Lovable, one of the typical things is it's becoming so easy that you don't have to be a coder, but you can have working prototypes sent to your customers way faster for actually end user feedback. What do you want? Is this a good idea or not? And this one kind of like got me thinking. On the edge, when we pushed everything out into production and the end user doesn't like it, could we generate the code and see if they like it? Not just a feature flag toggle, but kind of change the behavior and see if there's something the customer wants. So the discovery can be done before the coding, but it can definitely also be done in the production system as well. So the more our time kind of frees up, maybe we can spend our time and unbundle our tasks to do that stuff. The last one, going from content to knowledge. And content is quite liberal, and naming the patterns have been hard, so bear with me in this. But you've already seen that the more content we have, the more we can feed it into the context of those systems, and the better the answers become. If you have bad content, right, that's been challenging because it just repeats your errors. So knowing what good looks like is important in there. It could be a documentation, but it could also be the guidelines again that we're dealing with, or how do people build software in the ecosystem of Python is different from how people build it in Node.js. So all that industry kind of content we can turn into knowledge there as well. We can take production information, right? Or kind of this is being outdated. Sorry, this is documentation that is being outdated when we change things in the code. This was indeed taking open telemetry information to feed it back what we should do. Imagine you doing something in your IDE, changing the code, and it tells you, well, you know that that little piece of code that you're changing is used by 1 million users. Are you really sure? That is kind of connecting two dots. Now, it's interesting when I talk to the code generation tools, they're like, we're in the silo of code generation. When I talk to the ops people, they're in the ops thing. So we'll still have to connect somehow the dots to get that feedback. But yeah, that's going to be the interesting part. Writing incident responses, learning from what has happened, definitely documentation, and then turning it to the knowledge so we don't repeat that same stuff when we're coding or when this happens again. But it also can be something as trivial or not useful. We have an existing code base and somebody's new being onboarded. Let's take that code base and turn that into lessons, because we have information about like the prompts that we build. We keep track of that stuff. We have the product requirements. And so if somebody asks like, why are we doing this again? Well, here's all the knowledge that you need to do. Onboarding new devs, what are your kind of like standards? That turns it into knowledge as well. And kind of even keeping track of the features now like this, but in the past it's been like this because, and we changed it because of that. That is knowledge. It's often lost. Try to kind of understand what the product reasoning was. And then you maybe like in 2 years, somebody tries the same thing again, right? That is another piece of knowledge that we can capture. I find this particularly interesting in Devin, where they say you have the chat conversation with the LLM, and it's kind of helping you do your job. But at a certain moment, he says, this looks like a really important piece of information. Should we save this as knowledge? Yes or no? So he's actually doing this for obviously its own advantage because it can generate better results. But that same knowledge is actually also helpful for a human to deal with that knowledge as well, if it's being captured. Might be the terminology that is very specific to your company, might be something that is in your team specific, but kind of those things. And this becomes almost like in line. You're helping it, it's helping you, it's capturing that knowledge and saving all that things. And then when somebody else comes on your pull request and says, hey, I don't think this right. Hang on, I have all this information of knowledge to tell you why we did it like that. Are you sure it's not right? So kind of that feedback loop closing. Now, back to the elephant, right? Are we getting from scaling people to scaling compute? My hypothesis is we still need somebody that knows how good looks like, right? In what form? That's going to be the challenge, right? But the pull request is determining, the first part is the code being generated, is that good and bad? We have to review it. The intent, somebody needs to actually know the business on what we want to do. Then on the discovery, they have to choose the right option, right? Because all the requirements. And then the knowledge, they have to kind of say, is that actually knowledge or is this like some kind of trivial thing that we're trying to do? So that shift of dealing with the structure is the interesting part. So I think it always reminds me when people said, during the beginning of DevOps, we're going to automate ourselves out of a job. Well, pieces of that happened if you didn't adapt and you didn't go into other pieces of your task or expand it in doing different things. So I think that's now also what we have to do, is kind of go into those different areas. Now, a little plug, I'm helping a community, AINativeDev, where we actually focus on this news. We just got started. And I had a little bit less sleep today, is we're launching this landscape where, similar to the CNCF, we're trying to get you an overview of the tools. So you don't have the FOMO of like what tools are out there. It's obviously not about the tools, but it helps to understand what is possible right now and what can we do and what is kind of rubbish in there. So if you want to talk at the event or follow the event, please kind of submit something. So when I put up this diagram, right, the developer shifts a little bit to the QA and the architect, or it understands a little bit more on the operations or knowledge or product. Now, good engineers already do this. They kind of care a little bit more of all the pieces. And then the question always comes like, but you need to be senior. And I like your comment about the staff engineer, like when do you get into the platform team, when you're allowed to do this? But when I asked the younger people or entering the space, like, aren't you scared that you can't never be the expert? The answer they almost consistently give us is, we can learn way faster with AI. And if we create that safe environment for them to experiment and to learn, right, all the information is out there for them to learn. So maybe they get through the meat real faster, and it doesn't need like the scar tissue of us having lived through all the kind of issues before. Another remark I get is somebody said, this is exactly what I'm going through with managing an open source project, right? I become the architect. I never knew I was the architect. I was just going to do some code, and now I have to make sure it's being deployed. So a lot of those things are applicable. But for me, they're a helpful lens to know where I need to go in one of the directions and start experimenting with the tools and kind of get more out of my tools as well. So you can stay in your kind of development and the code generation, but I think more holistically, other areas are experimenting there as well. Now, people from the other areas, product data QA, they're also heading towards us. They're also unbundling their jobs. So it's going to be an interesting kind of thing to see where we end up. And that's my talk. I hope it was useful. Please give me feedback on the patterns. They're fresh, new. If you think something that your experience is not fitting into the patterns, that's great. If you think they are, please also tell me. You can connect on LinkedIn. You can get my slides, but the only thing that I ask is give me feedback, solid feedback, good or bad, and then I'll send you the slides. Thank you very much.